Your physical and your emotional health are intertwined much more than you think. And from a central nervous system standpoint, and your ability for your brain to change itself into a more positive, healthier state, if you can find any means to help to hack your central nervous system, use it.
Okay.
Take advantage of it, implement it, and realize that you do have the ability to change your brain.
Welcome to Lived In by Zoe Therapy Services. I'm your host, Micah Faye, and I'm excited to share with you a community of experts who specialize in helping you feel fantastic. That's what Lived In aims to be, an online hub for DIY wellness, led by the experts and curated by folks who care. In this wellness series, I interview Richmond community leaders, vendors, and healers to empower you with a toolkit, one filled with healthy practices to make every day just a little bit better. So welcome to Lived In, your online comfy couch, surrounded by friends and supported by experts. Come on in. We're excited to have you. Well, hello and welcome to Lived In. I am your host, Micah Faye, and today I am here with Dr. David Berv, who is the Chief Experience Officer at the Float Zone. So, sir, I know nothing about floating. So can you pretend I'm a fifth grader and you are going to tell me about floating? Is that how you even say it?
Sure. Yeah, so floating, otherwise known as flotation, float therapy, sensory deprivation, restricted environmental stimulus therapy. There's a bunch of different names for what is a deeply relaxing, meditative, pain-relieving, sleep-inducing, mood-enhancing experience where you're in a fiberglass tank that's 9 feet long by 5 feet wide, filled with 10 inches of skin temperature water, which is about 93, 94 degrees, not your blood temperature of 98.6 degrees, but it's your skin temperature at its most relaxed state. And that 10 inches of water is saturated with 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt.
Oh my gosh.
Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate salt. And so it's not like table salt, even though it's called salt.
Yes.
Right? But that's the sort of the chemical symbol for it. But as a result of putting 1,000 pounds of salt in 10 inches of water like that, you're effortlessly buoyant, like a cork. And so you float effortlessly face up for an hour. And you can reduce other stimuli or eliminate other stimuli by either you can listen to ambient music or be in complete silence. You can have light on or be in complete darkness. You can leave the lid open or closed. So you can attenuate this tank, this pod, so to speak, to your comfort. But it's basically a sensory deprivation experience where you're removing stimuli, including gravity. And that's the most important part, is the removing of gravity. Our brains spend so much time in our place in space, the sounds, the sights, the smells, the taste, etc. And so you float face up effortlessly for an hour and you emerge feeling completely different. The biggest thing that's unique about this is that there's no one touching you. There's no one talking to you. There's no one interrupting you. There's just you in your own thoughts, and you're hearing your own breath, you're hearing your heartbeat, you're hearing your digestive noises. It's a very peculiar state. Some people don't know what to do in that state, and we can talk more about that in a little bit. But you always leave feeling different in both body and mind.
Wow. Okay, so then I want to know what the most common misconceptions are about floating, and how you as an owner combat them. Because when I heard of floating, I thought that's entirely woo-woo. That can't be real. You know what I mean? So how do you combat those kinds of thoughts, or do you not?
I moved here from Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And that's where I went to chiropractic college in Portland, Oregon. When I moved here, I felt when people ask me, where did you move from? I told people I moved from the future. Because things on the West Coast are very different than things on the East Coast. The way people think about their health, the way people think about politics, the way people think about the world is different out there than here. And so when I moved here as a ponytailed chiropractor from a very liberal, open-minded
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest state, as a chiropractor up against a very medical society here,
Yeah.
it was like, what's chiropractic? Why would I want to go to a chiropractor?
Yeah.
And I feel very similar 20-something years later trying to explain floating to people,
Yeah.
right? Because floating is very different. It's not new, but I think the reason why people feel it's woo-woo is just because it hasn't been in our common, day-to-day like yoga has been, for instance.
Yeah.
So education is really the key, and that's, I know we're going to talk a little bit about what got me here and
Yeah.
whatever, but that's a big part of it too, is using my own influence in the local healthcare world here,
Yeah.
and the people that I know and the connections that I have to educate practitioners and to educate other people about the value of floating. And I think that my personal story will help to shed light on that too, because a lot of people are searching and seeking
Yeah.
for ways in which to help their anxiety,
Yeah.
to help their stress, to help their sleep, to help their chronic pain states or chronic illnesses. And this is one of those things, floating is one of those things that works on the nervous system in a way that practically nothing else does.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very different, and in that regard, it can be seen as woo-woo,
Okay.
right? It can be, what is this? I'm going to sit there and like float for an hour, and it's going to affect my levels of cortisol. Yep.
Yeah.
It's gonna, my mood is gonna feel different after I get out. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, as a skeptic, I really like history, and you said that floating isn't new, which surprises me. So can you tell me the
Sure.
history of floating?
Sure. So floating began in the early mid-1950s with a neuroscientist named John Lilly, who worked for the National Institutes of Health, and he was working on states of consciousness. And the tanks at the time looked very different. They were horizontal tanks where you were immersed in it and your head was just barely above, and then you had this crazy equipment on and stuff. And his experimentation led to the concept of sensory deprivation, which had kind of a negative connotation at the time, sort of like you're in some chamber that you can't escape from, or it's very scary or something like that. His studies then involved other people around the world, namely in like Scandinavia, the UK, Germany, Europe, that began to do studies and began to find this concept of immersing yourself in water interesting. It then led in the 60s and 70s with other research that then it became known with other researchers that became known as restricted environmental stimulus therapy.
Okay.
And then the 80s happened and the AIDS crisis happened.
Wow.
And everything that had to do with the transmission of disease in water changed the plight of, and the awareness of, and the accessibility of float tanks and their benefits. And so pretty much was not in anyone's world, except it was still in the world of those people in the UK and in Europe and in Sweden and in Scandinavia, but we didn't really hear a lot about it in the United States.
Okay.
And it really wasn't until the early 2000s, 2004, 2007, on the West Coast, that float tanks began to re-emerge again after many, many years with different iterations of new technology, new filtration, new design, and new information that came out with certain studies. And most of those studies had to do with anxiety. And most of the current studies also have to do with anxiety. There's many other things too, but so it's now making a resurgence after 30 years back into the consciousness of people, but kind of coming from West Coast to East Coast. And so that's a lot of why the East Coast hasn't really heard about it. And really the East Coast didn't really have any meaningful existence of float tank centers until 2014, 2015, as early as that.
Okay. So who is an ideal floater? Floatee? What do you call them?
A floater.
A floater. Who is an ideal floater? Who should be floating currently?
It sounds kind of trite to say everybody.
But everybody.
There definitely are people that shouldn't float. Maybe, we can talk about those people that shouldn't float too. But, we live in a society now where anxiety and mental health issues are paramount to everyone's thought right now. And what people also don't realize is that chronic pain and other types of chronic illnesses follow the same neurological pathways to the brain as anxiety. It's hard to separate, pain and emotional state with regard to the brain. And so if you or anyone is looking to de-stress, reduce anxiety, reduce pain, sleep better, manage illness, or work in tandem with any other therapy that's in the wellness spectrum, floating helps to leverage that. So there's really even from, if children can behave themselves in there, right? And so, you don't want to, not 4-year-olds don't float.
Right.
But certainly teens can float all the way up to, talking about mobility issues. As we get older, all of us get degenerative arthritis and we have knee problems and shoulder problems and back problems that limit our ability to ambulate, to walk around, to move. And then we get sedentary and then other health problems come in. And so even from a mobility standpoint, floating for an hour allows you to do things that you wouldn't do otherwise.
So then I am curious, who shouldn't float?
Those people perhaps with severe clinical depression.
Interesting.
Those people with, uncontrolled diabetes, with uncontrolled, if you have seizures and you're not on medication for seizures, there are certain times when you're going through chemotherapy. When I say certain times, that's not what I meant. It was like, if you're going through chemotherapy, you shouldn't be floating. When you're done with chemotherapy, to manage, to manage your lifestyle as you're going into remission. Right after a steroid shot, probably shouldn't float, because there are many things that you might do, many medications that you might just start that their side effects often happen within the first 72 hours, right? And so you don't want to float, and then it's like, whoa, was that the float that just provoked that? Or no, it was the, It was the shot that I just had, the medication that I just started, or whatever. If you're in your first trimester of pregnancy, not that you shouldn't float, but if you've had a difficult first trimester, maybe not the best. Maybe you should talk to your your OBGYN before doing that. Okay. But it's more about safety. It's people that are, I think there's many people that are claustrophobic that think that they're going to be claustrophobic, that find that, I thought that was going to be a contraindication for me, but this is actually the most wonderful thing. And in fact, the people that are often the most fearful about being claustrophobic find that this is not that experience, that there is actually more room and more free feeling than they thought. So yeah, certain health conditions, maybe, including even my own health condition of multiple sclerosis, that I'm heat sensitive, right? And so the water temperature, like I told you, is supposed to be about 93.5, 94 degrees.
Okay.
The temperature, if it's 95 or 96 or 97, can be harmful to people like myself, or people with autoimmune or other types of sensitivities like that. So yeah, there are certain things to think about, but there are not a huge amount of contraindications or people that shouldn't float.
That's so interesting, because I have diagnosed PTSD, and the idea of floating to me sounds like an actual nightmare. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know how you get people past that space. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So PTSD is one of the reasons why many people float.
Really?
PTSD falls under, an anxiety kind of category too, right?
Certainly.
And so one of the biggest things that you get as a result of floating is it has been shown on functional MRI to shrink the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes fear.
Yeah.
And communicates with other parts of the brain about the fight or flight. And so if you can actually do something by literally doing nothing, by sitting floating in a tank for an hour, to affect that part of the brain, by doing nothing,
pretty big deal.
That you can help to actually make a difference. It's interesting though, because when you're in the float state, even though it's sensory deprivation, called sensory deprivation, it's almost like a sensory enhancement in a way. Because you're aware, like I said, of your breathing, and you hear your heartbeat, and you could hear your digestive noises, and you're really aware of your thoughts. And so someone with PTSD, yes, you can certainly have looping thoughts in there. But if you come equipped with the knowledge, and for instance, in our center, we have an introductory orientation video that you watch before you get in that prepares you for some of these things. That, to work with your breath, to maybe leave the lid open, to leave the light on, to listen to music while you're in there, to distract you.
Yeah.
Right? And then you get into this different state, and before you realize it, you realize you're not scared, but everyone is different.
Yeah.
Everyone is different. And so it's kind of like, a homeopathic dose of something that, in a large dose would actually produce a negative effect.
Right.
Like these isolation tanks, it's almost like a homeopathic remedy for isolation. We've all been isolated for the last year or whatever. Yeah. The thought of like getting in a tank and isolating yourself, but that then changes your perception of things.
Yeah.
And so, people with PTSD have certain triggers. They have certain things that set them off.
Right.
And floating can lower that threshold of what sets you off.
So what I'm hearing is really anyone can try floating, excluding some like actually very medical diagnoses. I was sort of expecting to be more emotional, but it seems like every kind of person with a mental health issue, excluding severe clinical depression, should and could try floating.
At least try floating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Wow.
mean, it's like the worst case scenario is you didn't have a good experience.
Yeah.
And it's not injurious. So you're not going to be scarred by it. You know, you're not going to certainly be, nothing physical is going to happen to you.
Right.
You know, I think that the worst things that happen sometimes is that, you know, as a result of stress and getting worked up over even being nervous about floating, you get in the tank and almost have an exaggerated stress response, and you can feel nauseous.
Really?
So some people feel nauseous. Very few, but some people feel nauseous when they float as an over-exaggeration to their own internal stress, or or like almost like I said, kind of a stress letdown in the tank. It's so relaxing. It's like, whoa, this is not familiar, and then your body starts to ramp up again, and you can, you know.
So you can cause yourself to go into a stress response.
Exactly.
Interesting. I have so many more questions, but let's talk about your trajectory, how you got into the floating, and I hear you're a chiropractor,
Yeah.
so let's talk about that too.
So I'm a chiropractic sports physician. I'll call it a recently retired chiropractic sports physician and a diplomat in acupuncture. I practiced sports chiropractic with a specialization in acupuncture in sports for almost 20 years.
Wow.
At the height of my career, where I had a really specialized approach towards working with people with very complicated cases, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. This is in 2013. And it really took me to my knees at that time, and it was a very confusing time for me. And I had to quickly reflect upon, you know, what's going to happen with the rest of my career.
Right.
At that time, shortly after my diagnosis, I was visiting a brother in Colorado, and he said to me, "David, you're a mess. I need to take you for a float." And I said, "What do you mean? What's a float?" So we go to this float center, these same fiberglass tanks that I was describing before, and you're in your own room, your own shower in the room, has earplugs, towels, all the stuff that you need. I floated, I got out of that hour float, and I felt different. And I was in terrible pain. I was not feeling good up here. And I got out, and I was standing up tall, and I was feeling good, and I said, "This is amazing. From the lens of a musculoskeletal specialist, this is really good for a lot of different things."
Yeah.
That led me quickly to researching me getting one for my home.
Oh.
And so it wasn't long after I returned from that trip that I ended up getting a float tank for my home. And I turned my home office into a personal float center. And in 2014 and in 2015, I floated hundreds of times. And I really got to know the benefits of floating and the many different ways in which, as I said, from my lens, how it can help people with chronic illness, with chronic stress, with sleep issues. And so that's what led me to saying, I need to reevaluate my career. You know, I'm not sure, or should I say, having reflected upon what got me to that state in the first place, I realized that I'm not sure that I was going to be able to continue practicing what I love doing, but my protective, compassionate bubble that I had around me so that I could give to others and touch others and help others with their pain and their problems, my bubble had burst and their energy was getting into my energy in a bad way. And I realized that's not a good thing for my health condition. I think I need to change gears. So that was when I decided I'm going to open a float center. And at the time, in terms of opening the float center, my practice at the time was a large interdisciplinary healthcare center. So there was chiropractic, acupuncture, massage, yoga, Pilates, nutritional counseling, and a number of other things. I purposely just wanted floating, uniquely floating, because one of the ways in which I practiced for a number of years was in an interdisciplinary cooperative way. I referred out to a lot of different people. I realized that chiropractic or acupuncture or massage in itself wasn't the be-all end-all for everybody. You need, a smorgasbord. You need a team of people to help you. And so I said, floating leverages everything. Let me just offer one thing and do it well. And so that led to the opening of the float zone, where there's 4 individual float tanks all in their own room, and so we can host 4 people at one time. It was really hard for me to shift gears abruptly. Like, it shouldn't be a surprise that someone that's been doing something for 20 years at the prime, I'm only 53 years old right now.
Yeah.
And in the middle of my career to just say, stop, you have all these specializations, stop doing what you're doing and you're going to do something completely different.
Yeah.
So I still have this burning clinical desire inside me, and have been since the beginning trying to turn lemons into lemonade, right? So trying to use my clinical skills and my clinical knowledge in a different way, to retool myself so that I can help people even in a broader scale than I was helping them before.
Yeah.
Because it was more from a musculoskeletal approach, even though it necessarily involves kind of the emotional approach when you're in any kind of chronic pain. But floating now offers a window of opportunity to so many different types of conditions that I wasn't able to see before. And not like I'm treating these people, but I'm facilitating their wellness through learning about the benefits of floating. And so it was a month before I opened the center that I was participating in the build out of the center. And I was on a 4-foot scaffold with a spray gun, a paint spray gun, spraying the walls. My head was above the grid line and the drop ceiling, and the scaffold slipped on me because I didn't lock the wheels.
Oh gosh.
And I fell on my head on the concrete floor and concussed myself. I floated like crazy during that time too. And that was the segue actually into, so I opened up the float center in April of 2016 with a concussion while I was floating regularly. And you often attract what you give out. And so it was weeks after we opened that people with concussions and traumatic brain injuries started coming in to float. And we have a very comfortable post-float lounge after you float. The center is very purposefully designed. I visited dozens of centers before I opened all across the United States and Canada for feel, flow, equipment choices. And so the flow of our center is such that, the people that are walking in the door don't mingle with the people that have already floated in that relaxed state. But I go in to talk to people after their float. I welcome people when they come in, give them a tour after they've seen the orientation video. And then afterwards, hey, did you enjoy your float? Why were you floating today, right? And so I remember one of the very first people that came in, this 39-year-old female dentist on disability that had a car crash and traumatic brain injury 15 months earlier, said, I'm here because my boyfriend thought this would be something that would help my traumatic brain injury to heal.
Wow.
So here I am starting off a business, and I'm wearing all these different hats, but yet I have this clinical burn inside me and I said, do you want to do a case study?
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of doing numerous different clinical case studies on floating in various conditions.
Yeah.
And so that particular case study, which lasted 12 weeks, has given birth to neck pain studies, low back pain studies, headache studies, opioid studies,
Wow.
Autoimmune studies such as MS and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, workplace wellness studies, and a bunch of other studies, and that has given me purpose too, and that's given me a way in which to educate people about why would I float.
Right.
I've worked now with a lot of different healthcare professionals that not only refer in to floating
Right.
for various things, counselors that are working with people with divorce, grieving, PTSD and anxiety, other healthcare practitioners that are working with people with wanting to make nutritional changes or having addictions, other pain management professionals that are having a hard time making progress. They've plateaued with their patient, and so they refer people in to float to reduce the sympathetic nervous system so that we're not on overdrive,
Right.
and they can work on the patient better. But moreover, many healthcare professionals are coming into float now.
I was wondering about that.
So we have a lot of primary care physicians, nurse practitioners, anesthesiologists, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists. We have so many, massage therapists. I'm trying to think. We have a business card rack card holder, right?
Yeah.
Of practitioners that come into float that leave their cards there, and there's over 100 different cards there of practitioners that come into float. So it's getting a better name here locally, and I think people are learning about it also through their healthcare professionals.
Right. That's really cool to build a sort of wellness community, which I imagine is a lot more common on the West Coast than it is on the East. Do you think?
Oh, for sure.
Sharing business as opposed to hoarding it?
For sure.
Yeah.
And that was something that was very foreign to me when I moved here. The territorialism and the one-track mind of many people that their particular angle is the only angle. And there, as opposed to the abundance kind of thought process where, you're going to share the wealth that's going to come back to you. There's enough people to fill your slots, but also, I've always been one to not to hold back something if I feel like there's a tool that's going to help somebody.
Yeah. So I'm curious about sort of the day in and day out of owning a float zone. And I'm curious, especially in COVID, the sanitation needs must be crazy. So could you give me like a rundown of your day, just a quick one, if you don't mind?
Yeah. Well, first of all, nothing's going to grow COVID's not going to transmit in the water.
Right.
So it's more the surfaces and the air that we have to think about. So we have 4 tanks, but we have purposefully chosen to not use all those tanks all the time. We could, but it's more about not only that, you're in your own tank in your own room, but when you leave that room, even though you're wearing a mask, there could be 3 or 4 other people around.
Yeah.
So we've even reduced that so that you're not really you're seeing maybe 1 person or 2 people or whatever. But there's a lot of cleaning all the time.
Yeah.
So someone walks in the door, they sign the COVID form, they're wearing a mask, and, they fill out their waiver, they watch the orientation video, they go in their own room. They shower before they get in the tank, they float, they get out of the tank and shower again. While they're showering, the tank is completely filtering the entire contents of that 175 gallons of water 4 times.
Wow.
Through UV light, through ozone, and through 1 micron bag cartridge. Huge, huge filtering the water. Mm-hmm. Once the person leaves the room, we spray down the whole room with a hydrogen peroxide solution that's been CDC approved. And we go down and wipe all the touch points throughout the entire center. Someone's been in the bathroom, we go in and wipe down, and then in between people, there's a half an hour at least, and often hours between someone using that next room.
Yeah.
The doors are open. We have fans that are pulling out and circulating the air in there. And then we've self-imposed, the amount of people that we see in one day, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's already, even before COVID, we were crazy about cleaning anyway.
I'm sure.
We still filtered completely 4 times the water, We still went through and wiped down the entire pod and wiped down the showers and wiped down the rooms before anyway. So it's an exaggeration of what was before, but, we were already almost there.
Right. How does a person prepare to go float? Like, what do you wear? Mm-hmm. Does it matter?
It does matter.
Okay.
So you float naked.
Wow.
Right? And part of the purpose of that, number 1, is so that you're not wearing a soapy detergent bathing suit in our pod. You're rinsing product and hair oils and body oils off of you before you get in. But you don't want things touching you and clinging to you, and you don't want to be aware of things while you're in there. You're trying to remove senses.
Yeah.
And so, when you're in the bathtub, do you wear a bathing suit? When you shower, do you wear a bathing suit? So you don't wear a bathing suit when you float. You do wear silicone earplugs that you put in your ears prior to getting yourself wet in the shower.
Okay.
Prior to getting in. And some people don't like earplugs, and you don't have to wear earplugs, but it's nice to keep the salt water out of your ears. And it's hard not to get the salt water deep inside your ear. That's hard to clean out afterwards, even through showering. And sometimes, a day later, you're hearing, crackling noises in your ear from the dried salt.
Right.
So you don't wear anything in terms of preparing for your float. The most important thing is to not rush to get there.
Huh.
Right? So you walk in the door and your heart's beating 120 beats per minute because you've just been in traffic and you're late for your appointment. And then you get into a tank and do nothing, and you wonder why you can't relax. Mm. And so making sure that you arrive early is part of the preparation.
Okay.
That you're not eating a big meal. Because, as I mentioned, you hear body noises when you're underwater. So you hear your breathing, you hear your heartbeat, and you hear digestive noises to some degree.
Okay.
If you've just eaten and you put yourself in a relaxed state, otherwise known as the rest and digest state, you digest.
Yeah.
and you start to hear more stomach noises. And that can be disturbing to you. You don't want to drink a big cup of coffee or take a B vitamin or take your asthma inhaler before you get in, and now you're all jazzed up and you wonder why you can't relax.
Right.
Other than that, you don't know what to expect your first time that you float. And so I always encourage people, try different positions. You know, especially sometimes like myself. I don't even like talking about this because it bothers me so much, but because of my multiple sclerosis, which affects the transmission of messages throughout my nerves, I can hear the nerves in my neck.
Wow.
That sounds like fast Morse code when I'm floating. And it really irritates me. And I have to get into a different state of mind, really work on my breathing. But my point being is that sometimes I find that this is the most comfortable position.
Yeah.
Or like some other sprawled out position like that is the most comfortable position for me. The one thing that you'll notice too, as far as preparing, it's not as much preparing as knowing how to help yourself when you have looping thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
When you get in there and like all you can think about is, the events that happen during the day, or something that you have to do, that you can work with your breathing. Your breathing is so free when you're in there. You have, you don't have anything touching you. Your rib cage is free. Your muscles of respiration are free. Your throat is free. Mm-hmm. And so working with seeing how few breaths you can take per minute.
Right.
Counting your breaths. Keeping your eyes open in the pitch dark and scanning your eyes in the pitch dark for light spots that you're not going to find. Coordinating your breathing with your eye movements helps to trip your mind into a different state of being, and many people actually fall asleep in there, fall asleep while floating, and then have what's called a hypnagogic twitch, which is you wake up. Have you ever felt that?
Of course, yeah.
And so you're literally sleeping in water, and you have those, and then you realize, oh, I was somewhere.
Right.
But part of preparing is knowing that, part of preparing is maybe being open-minded to whatever might happen, right?
It sounds like there's like an advanced version of floating.
Well, the advanced version is floating a second and a third time.
Okay.
Because many people that come in the first time, many people have profound experiences the first time. Many other people are like, yeah, it was great, but I like massage and I like acupuncture, and I'll include it in my wellness regimen, but I don't really, those people that try it a second time and specifically a third time really get it. And you're really able to understand how you can use floating for your best wellness purposes.
Yeah.
So when you come in the first time, some people are like, my wife brought me here, I don't even know why I'm here. To, I'm here for curiosity, I'm here for relaxation, I'm here for stress, I'm here for anxiety, I'm here for pain, I'm here for sleep, whatever. But, the first time you might leave the light on and listen to music, and you have no idea what it would have been like to be in darkness and silence and floating effortlessly for an hour.
Yeah.
And so you try it the second time, and you're like, oh my God, I wish I had tried that the first time. And then you have a second different experience, which is even better. And you're like, then the next time you're like, you know what? I'm going to try it not Wednesday in the middle of the week at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to try it on Friday at 4 p.m. and kick off my weekend.
Wow.
Or I'm going to try it, at the end of my weekend or something. Or I'm going to try it to kick off my vacation.
Right.
Or now I realize that I want to set an intention of, I'm going to use it at the end of an exhausting week, or Or, there's people that use it for creative means, for writing. You get out of there and you're like, oh my God, my brain is just free flowing.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to me. Like I'm able to do my physical and mental heavy lifting, so to speak, after a float. And so my worst times of day are actually right around now. 11 to 2 o'clock is like my low time.
Yeah.
And that's when I float. So I float at the noon to 2 time, and then it carries me through for days after. But certainly the rest of that afternoon, that's when I'm like, oh, that's when my creative mind's working and I can think clearly.
Cool.
And so when you float for the first time, you don't know any of that. And like with many things, whether it's even yoga or whatever, right? You're like looking at the clock, and then some people, okay, I'm not going to, but then you come back a second and a third time, you realize, wow, this is having some cumulative benefits in my life.
Right.
So yeah, it is something that you do have to try a couple times.
Is it helpful to set an intention before you get into the
Totally.
tank?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes and no.
Okay.
because you can have a really profound float by just like not having any expectations.
Right.
Sometimes putting expectations on yourself, you feel almost defeated when you come out. Like, oh, I didn't think of the idea.
I see.
It wasn't as fruitful as I thought. I thought I was going to have this profound experience and I didn't.
Right.
As opposed to, I'm going to focus on, like for me, I will, I'll do maybe a body scan underwater.
Yeah.
Where I'm, focusing on my ankle, my knee, my low back, or I'm focusing on healing the lesions in my brain while I'm doing that. It's something positive that I'm doing, or maybe I'm thinking about ideas for another blog that I'm going to write or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, so I do encourage people to set an intention before they float.
I was thinking specifically about pain. I have chronic migraines and my head is starting to really hurt as we're talking.
Mm-hmm.
And then my brain is just thinking, this is what's going to happen next. This is, as you do when you're in pain, right? And so I was just wondering, like, not for an emotional or intellectual outcome, but can you get in and say, like, brain, you're going to stop actively hurting yourself and work towards that? I don't know. Is that even possible?
Yes, because you've reduced the senses everywhere, you feel like you're in a cloud.
Wow.
Right? So without any perception of pressure, without any perception of using postural muscles, without any, other sights and smells, whatever, you're really able to focus on anything.
Crazy.
Intently. So the visualization is really magnified in there. And one of the other things that got sidelined by COVID was that we had just introduced underwater guided meditation while you're floating to do, like, to work on self-compassion, to work on body scans, to work on various things. But to answer your question, yes. So you could sit in there and be focusing on just gentle breathing and focusing on your head.
Right.
And when you got out, you'll feel different.
Yeah. Just a procedural question. What is the optimal number of times a week to float for the average person? Just curious.
I'm not sure weekly for the average person is the right way to put it. That I think that there's optimal float schedules for everyone depending upon your goals.
Okay.
So are you somebody that already has a myriad of wellness techniques in your bag already, and so you're already doing acupuncture, chiropractic, yoga, meditation, massage, already, maybe you would float once monthly.
Okay.
What if you're dealing with a mental health crisis? You might want to float twice weekly.
So it's really individual, it seems.
It's really individual, but if you are trying to accomplish any kind of mental, physical, emotional goal, that floating weekly is really the way to go.
Okay.
Or floating regularly, and by regularly I mean at least twice monthly.
How often would you say you float?
I float twice weekly.
Okay. See, that's less than I expected just by the way you were talking. It seemed like every day.
Yeah, you find your sweet spot for floating. Sometimes you can do too many parasympathetic activities, too many activities that put you in a more restful state, and it has a backfire kind of approach for me. So I think there needs to be a balance of that, and I think that, and also just for the average person too, the affordability, is hard to do it on a regular basis. And if you did have a chronic condition, that might even necessitate getting one for your own home. But I think, and that's what we've done, is made it more affordable and accessible, so that I can practice what I preach with the clinical case studies that have shown that floating weekly helps everything. And so, like, the various parameters that I tracked was, even if I was monitoring someone with chronic low back pain, I was monitoring their sleep and anxiety too.
Of course, yeah.
And so, that's what we've realized is that clinically speaking and anecdotally, what we've seen is that floating on a weekly basis has profound effects. Floating in tandem with anything else leverages whatever you're doing, and that floating also kind of smooths out, calms your lifestyle when you're doing it on a regular basis.
Learning so much in my talk with you, and we only have a few more minutes. But wow, maybe need to do a second episode. There are just so many questions. But my favorite question: you, have a very beautiful and interesting life story. So from that experience and your experience as a chief experience officer and a master floater probably at this point, what's one piece of your knowledge that I can take and that I can give to my neighbors, even if they can't afford to go float, or even if they've never floated or they have no interest in floating? What's one thing that I can take to them to help care for my community?
A piece of knowledge with regard to floating, or just in general?
Kind of in general, because it seems like you have these sort of epiphanies while you float. So
Yeah.
I want one.
Yeah.
I want a nugget.
Your physical and your emotional health are intertwined much more than you think. And from a central nervous system standpoint, from your brain and your ability for your brain to change itself into a more positive, healthier state, if you can find any means, whether it's using breath work, yoga, cold showers, floating,
Yeah.
to help to hack your central nervous system, use it.
Okay.
Take advantage of it, implement it, and realize that you do have the ability to change your brain. And I'm a living example of that. I have stopped my multiple sclerosis in its tracks.
Wow.
I do not take MS medication. I use mind techniques and mind over matter, so to speak, through the various things that we've just talked about, that many of which are free to do.
Yeah.
Breathing is free. And you know, so learning how to take advantage of modalities and therapies that are available to you to help to change your brain is a good pursuit.
So I will be sure to remember that my mind and my body are the same, and that they're far more intertwined in their workings than I might initially assume.
Yes, it's hard to influence one without influencing the other, and that by influencing one, you can influence the other.
Okay, so how do I go to the Float Zone? What number do I call? What website do I visit? How do I go?
Yes, so myfloatzone.com.
Okay.
We're also on social media on Instagram and Facebook. The handle is The Float Zone or My Float Zone, depending on.
Okay.
And you can schedule online at myfloatzone.com. You can call 551-1413. And the online booking is really easy, or we can help you by calling.
Okay. So 804-551-1413?
Yes.
Very cool. All right, and then the last thing, you seem like the kind of person who is always chasing some sort of new thing, and I'm also that kind of person, so what's the new thing? What's cool right now in your world?
What's cool right now is Wim Hof breath work.
See, never would have guessed that.
Okay. Yeah, what's cool now is using your breath to hack your nervous system.
Okay.
And to hack the oldest part of your nervous system, which is, what controls our breathing, right? And so when we're in a fight or flight state, we tend to breathe short and shallow. Yeah. And so the Wim Hof breathwork technique is a particular way to it's a breathing cycles that you do to help to calm your nervous system. Okay. There's many other forms of breath work, namely ceremonial breath work is another really good one.
Having a ceremonial breath worker come on the show. It's going to be great.
That's going to be another wonderful topic to talk about because breath work and the many different iterations of it is another wonderful free way to your wellness. So I would say that's the new thing.
That's the new thing you're chasing?
The new thing. And that also includes something that I don't really like that much, which is taking cold showers.
Yeah, you've mentioned that 2 times now, and it really surprised me.
That's part of the Wim Hof technique. Mm-hmm. The breath work along with the cold immersion. So whether you're taking an ice bath, right, or whether at the end of your comfortable warm shower you turn off the hot and leave the cold on, and you continue with a calm breath while you have the freezing cold water on you. And so you're subjecting yourself to what your body is interpreting as a fight or flight situation, mm-hmm, but you're remaining calm in that situation, which is the same thing that you're doing with the breath work.
Right.
And by doing that, you're tricking your nervous system. Mm-hmm. And by doing it repeatedly, you're making permanent change.
Right.
And so every morning in the shower, I say, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I really just want to end with warm. I don't want to, and I'm like, nope.
That's awesome.
Just breathe.
It's also healthier for your hair. I don't know if you know that.
I didn't know that, but
it helps to seal your follicles because they go into fight or flight and they say, and then that keeps the moisture in your hair. Mm-hmm. So you're not only doing good for your body, you're doing good for your hair as well.
Yeah. So once you get into a more advanced floating state, when you've floated a bunch of times, you can even do things like breath work while floating.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on now.
That's awesome. Apparently we need an advanced floating class. I love it. Well, Dr. Berv, awesome to hang out with you today. Definitely go visit My Float Zone here in Richmond, Virginia. And I can't wait to hear more about cold showers and breathwork. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.